Hey folks, we're back again. We got the man back. Don't know what it was, back camera trouble or I don't know. But at least I didn't need to sing anyway. So main thing is we've got Mark back with us. But you know, I think that these things happen, Mark, in the world of tech. As great as technology is, sometimes it just goes south a wee bit.
Yeah.
I mean. But you're using your phone, so it should be all good. So where I can't actually remember where we were.
We were just basically talking about this brown lady ghost, and what this lady Townshend revealed to me was that there was medical records, bills, and things they found that suggest that this woman was unwell for quite a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And, the medical bills and the specialists that they got in doesn't really tie in with the stories that he was keeping her under lock and key because he hated her because she cheated on him. So, that hasn't been documented anywhere before, I don't think. So I was quite excited because obviously I got that from the family themselves. It was Lady Townshend who showed me that. She allowed me to walk up and down the staircase, but they didn't want photos taken, which I could respect.
You can't, as you say, they live there. That's their home. That's where someone coming into your house.
Yeah. This person had said that they were taking a photo of the stairs, and they'd actually kept the video rolling, and they'd apparently taped quite a lot of their house, and then put it on social media.
That's just a big taboo.
Yeah, so you could understand why they were so reluctant to let me take photos in the house. Obviously, I sent you some. You probably put them on your Facebook page. The photos I took outside the house. It's quite a spectacular place. The church. The church is probably 200 to 300 meters from the house itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's where this Dorothy is said to be buried. Although whether her coffin is full of bricks or not, and she's hidden away somewhere else, I don't think we'll ever know.
Yeah. Is there another, say that coffin is just filled with bricks, is there another kind of likely location that she might be?
I don't know. I wouldn't know that much. This information that we're sort of sharing tonight is not that well known. As I said, if I had been told this by somebody other than Lady Townshend herself, I'd be saying, where did you get that information from? Because, that's not documented anywhere. But she said that obviously the brown lady ghost has been passed down through their family from the generations. And they've lived in this house all their lives, and as of their ancestors going back to the early 18th century. And, the message that's been passed through the family was, yes, this Charles Townshend had a really violent temper. And it's basically saying that, the medical records and these bills that they discovered does tend to sort of contradict that he was, so angry with her, he kept her locked up and treated her so badly. And that's what's led them to come to the decision that it's more likely that she had something like dementia, which they didn't want the outside world to see, because it was like a huge slur on their family, to basically say you've got madness in your family would mean that, these other well-to-do families would certainly be put off marrying into your family if there was a history.
They give it a wide berth, but as I said earlier on, I think the story has a lot of credibility, plus the fact that the family, the Townshend family, haven't told it to get publicity, fame, tourists through the door, or anything like that. It's no, they're not done it to, and as you say, it goes back so many generations. You could understand if all of a sudden, they were saying, right, we've got this brown lady, she usually walks the staircase, and they start selling tickets, but that's not the case.
No. They do allow tours of the house, but they're not regular. They're not sort of like it's open every week. They occasionally open their doors. They're like, I walked around the house. It's a fantastic house, Scott. And like most of these big houses, I don't think they've now got the money to maintain it because it's listed. So everything has to be, it's not a case of just bringing in the odd builder in. You have to get specialist masons. They've got famous paintings in there, masterpieces and things. And, just having them refurbished and I think they showed me a portrait. I can't remember which one it was. And they're having to have it restored in stages, basically because of the amount of money involved. I mean, they're by no means poor, as we would view somebody as poor. But, I don't think they've got the sort of multi-millions of pounds which would be needed to refurbish the house properly. So if anything, they've got all the more reason for making up a story and getting people in there to see it and photograph it, because they could charge a lot of money, but they're not really interested. They don't believe that the story is true, and they've got evidence to support that. And as I said, when somebody comes in and films your house secretly under the pretense that they're taking a photo of your staircase, you can quite easily see why why they're upset. And when we walked around the house, there was about a party of 6 of us. They had a guy sort of behind us who was a butler or whatever, who was basically making sure that, I suppose, people don't, it's their home, so there's valuable items in there. I suppose if she was just showing people around, she can't be watching them all the time. They could, you could have picked up something of value. You could have been taking photos. You could have been videoing like they've experienced in the past. But they said, once it was on social media and we were seeing our own home, out there in the World Wide Web, they quite understandably were quite upset about it, which I'm quite a cheeky chap. I would have chanced my arm and said, look, could you possibly take a photo? You can take it yourself on my phone so that that it's just a photograph. But after she told me that story, I felt a bit embarrassed to actually say that,
But as I say, you can understand, they're home. And the last thing we would want is to look up Facebook or YouTube and see somebody filming our living room.
Yeah.
I think that would put kind of envy off. So I mean, we've spoke many times, Mark. You've been into paranormal for 40 plus years.
Yeah.
Walking about the house, did you feel anything? Did you pick up on anything, or
nothing at all? What I was really interested in was obviously, I did a lot of research on Hinchinbrook House in Huntingdon and the modern. And in particular, that white lady that appears on the cover of my book, that nobody knows who she actually is. And I had a stab that she was possibly Minna Ray. Now, this Minna Ray was, a very good singer. And when you walk, they have concerts in their sort of hallway as you walk. I mean, it's not the hallway you'd imagine in a home. It's a magnificent hallway with fantastic acoustics, and they actually have opera singers who perform there, in for concerts and things like that. And so I was wondering whether this Minna Ray actually ever performed there, because it is documented that she went round to these country houses in the east of England and gave performances. She certainly performed at Hinchinbrook House in Huntingdon. So there was a sort of little link that interested me, but I've still got the email address and everything of her secretary, and she took my details for her mailing list. So hopefully when they contact me at some point, I'll go back and give the information about Minna Ray and say, bearing in mind you told me that people came from miles to perform in your hall. I mean, I say a hall, it's a massive room. You could only fit 40, 50 people in there seated with somebody in the middle of the room singing. The acoustics are fantastic. It's one of those rooms where when you talk in it, it's hard to hear your voice because of the acoustics as such. You know, it's the sort of place where you'd want to sort of belt out a song and you'd hear that, but talking, the echo is such that when there's voices in there, it's very difficult to speak to people because the acoustics are so good. I know that sounds a bit strange, as if, well, you know, if you can't hear people, then why are the acoustics good? But it's the sort of place where, you know, if you belted out a song, it would echo and resonate.
Something like the Great Hall in Hampton Court.
Yes, yeah. If you basically had a number of people in there all talking to one another, the sort of echoes that you get from all those different conversations you'd hear it, and it would make it difficult to hear one another. If you sat perfectly quiet and one person sort of belted out a song, you would hear it really well. It would, you know, be amplified and sound really, I suppose, a bit like people sing in their bathroom, that sort of thing. You know, it sounds better.
You sing in the shower. I don't sing in the shower, you know, never sing in the shower. I don't tend to. But I don't know if you, I mean, the Great Hall in Hampton Court, I don't know if you've been in it, Mark. I've been in it 3 or 4 times. And, you know, you get that situation where you're in a place like that and there's loads of people talking,
Yes.
but it's all mumbled.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and it's not that you're trying to listen into people's conversations, you know, but you can't make out a word they're saying.
Yeah, I think it's because if you were in just in there talking by yourself to them, you would hear them. But because it's got such great acoustics, the other people who are not talking to you, who are talking to other people, you get sort of their voice amplified, and so it gives this sort of illusion that you've got lots of voices around you and they're all speaking at the same time. So it's very hard to hear the person you're actually speaking to.
Aye, that's exactly what I found in Hampton Court. Even the Great Gallery in Hampton Court is also a lot smaller.
Yeah.
You know, the Great Gallery where Catherine Howard's said to have chased after Henry.
Yes, yeah.
It's something the same, but not on a big, you know, not on such a big scale. But sometimes it can be hard. There's too many people in there.
Yes.
It's just all mumble, mumble, mumble.
Yeah,
but
that's...
Getting back to what you were saying about the link between, you know, the lady in your photograph and the performing, that's one of the things we've found fascinating since we, you know, started this channel. Is it's amazing the links that you find between 2 locations, sometimes just by sheer chance.
Yeah, well, you know, I found it amazing. You know, I when I started researching my book, I'd gone out to research sort of Huntingdonshire's ghosts, myths and legends. And then because these historical families like the Montagues, like Catherine of Aragon, have got links to Huntingdonshire, you sort of became interested in the history. And then you started digging up these, you know, facts. And you find that all these big, fine families, they all married into one another. So there are links between them. And what was particularly interesting is at Hinchinbrook House, John Montague, he was the guy who sponsored the voyages of Captain James Cook. And on one of his voyages, he brought back this Polynesian guy who was referred to as the Savage, although he was highly intelligent. And he became, he learned English very quickly. He was highly intelligent. And he was sort of became a local celebrity he was going to all these fine country houses, and he was far from being a savage. He was exactly the opposite. He was very eloquent, and he sort of became, I don't know, I suppose, you know, in those days, there's no TVs and no internet and things like that. So, you know, top musicians or top people like that were of interest, and they'd never ever seen a guy from Polynesia before. He looked different. There's a huge picture of him, actually. I think he was painted, I think, by Gainsborough. But he's, Oh My, his name was. And I think that possibly if I went to them and sort of told them about this Minaret and how she was an opera singer, and that we know that she performed in big country houses in the local area, East Anglia, if you like. And this Omai, this savage, he was basically sort of invited to all these country houses and was sort of quite a celebrity, really, in the end. And James Cook just brought him back from Polynesia, and you can imagine, in that time, somebody from Polynesia, nobody would have ever seen anybody from a different continent before.
I would totally, who is this person, and to be called the savage, it gives you an image, he's running about a jungle in a
Yes.
loincloth, basically, throwing spears at people, whatever.
Yeah.
And so, but as you say, back then, and they were all eloquent and, well-to-do kind of thing, to suddenly have this guy appear, for a totally different country and what have you, I think everybody would be wanting to see him.
Well, what is an interesting story about him, which I did uncover, is a lot of people think that he was the first person to have what we would call a barbecue, because what he did apparently was he went into the grounds at Hinchinbrook House, dug a hole, lit a fire, put all these stones on the fire and got the stones really hot. And then he put this, I think it was a leg of pork in there, which he'd marinated in spices and everything. He then covered them in leaves. And obviously nobody would have had a watch then. So he apparently watched the sun and could gauge how long from the sun's movement, from his eye, how long that meat had been cooking. And apparently they brought out this joint of pork and it was fabulous. And it's actually recorded that a lot of people think he was probably the first person in England to have what we would call a barbecue. That's quite interesting. Nothing to do with the paranormal, but all of a sudden it just shows you how these sort of well-to-do families all were linked, and they all basically was trying to show off their wealth to one another, and they all married into one another, which makes perfect sense. Why the Townshends wouldn't want it known that this Dorothy was mad when probably she was just suffering from what we would call early dementia.
Aye, the ones, but even in this day and age, people are kind of shunned upon if they seem, dementia, or whatever, if they just seem kind of different. People tend to shy away from them and what have you. So you can imagine back then, what family kind of felt as or no, we can't let her go anywhere, because also back there, as I said earlier on, dementia, a classic example is John Law in Pendle when he took the stroke.
Yeah.
Everybody thought he was cussed. They thought we Alice had cussed him.
Yeah.
But it was a stroke. So, all these conditions all go way back. And obviously, nobody knew what dementia, a stroke was. Even stuff, as one of the girls said in the chat earlier on about the menstrual cycle and all the rest of it. Nobody understood anything like that. It's just...
Well, this sort of registered with me, Scott, with, there's a number, obviously the Pendle Witches is something that you're well familiar with, but I went down to the Witchcraft Museum because we had in my book, there's a story about a witch called Annie Izzard, and I wanted to understand it a bit more. And so I went to the museum, which is in Boscombe in Cornwall, and I was talking to some of the staff there, and they said that in most cases, witches basically had discovered medicines and things like that, natural occurring medicines, like a drug like heroin or cannabis is naturally occurring, magic mushrooms, etc. So if you took something like magic mushrooms and you put them into somebody's food, and then they started hallucinating and acting peculiarly, other people who didn't know that they'd been given a drug would say, "Oh, he's been cursed, or he's been, a spell's been put on him." And in a lot of cases, that's why witches were seen to be were able to perform magical feats because, they use things. A very simple analogy that I tend to use is, when you get stung from a stinging nettle, you put a dock leaf and rub it on it, and there's something in the chemicals of the dock leaf that cools and eases the sting. And if you can imagine, if you didn't know that was just a chemical in the dock leaf 200 or 300 years ago, when people couldn't even read and write, that may well have been perceived as magic.
Exactly. I mean, we covered, the last months we've covered the witch trials.
Yeah.
We've covered Pendle extensively. We visited Pendle in July as well. But we done a full week of the various witch trials around the UK.
Yeah.
We've done Pendle, and then we've done Forgotten Pendle as well. And a lot of it was, people who used herbs and stuff like that to cure common ailments, even things like poultice. When you were young, well, my gran always did. It was sugar and soap.
Yes.
When you get a boil or something, my gran used to slap sugar and soap on it. It cured that.
Yeah.
And also back then, people just didn't understand it because and people were seen as different, and that's how they were persecuted. Whereas these days, it's common practice.
Yes, because obviously science, we understand now what causes, was it aspirin, isn't it, made from the bark of trees or whatever? If you imagine that people have obviously suffered from headaches for thousands and thousands of years, and suddenly someone comes along and finds a piece of bark from a tree or something that relieves the aspirin, until, the science had got there to determine what was in that bark and how it was curing the headache. People would see that as magic. God, I had a stinking headache. This guy came along. He gave me a magic potion. One of the things, I think I've mentioned this is quite a funny story, but I may have mentioned it before. When I went down to Boscombe, they told me that they used to, one of the tricks to do was these naturally occurring drugs or herbs or whatever you want to call them. The last thing that the witches wanted people to know was that it was something that grew at the bottom of everybody's garden. So they would disguise them. And the lady told me a story of how they would take garden mint and they would chop it up, and then they would blanch it in beetroot juice. So it turned a different colour to garden mint. This also neutralised the smell of mint. And how people who had sexual problems, they would rub it on their genitals, much the same as if you rub mint toothpaste onto your gum. It causes it to tingle, and therefore it was sort of sold as the Viagra of the day. And it was basically just garden mint that was grown in everybody's garden. And the last thing they wanted, the witches wanted, they were selling it as a magic potion, so they disguised it by blanching it in beetroot, which changed the colour, took away the smell of the mint, and therefore people weren't familiar with it and thought it was a magic potion, when all it was ordinary garden mint that had been blanched in beetroot juice and chopped up. And of course, when you rub mint onto a sensitive part of your body, like your gums or your genitals, it does stimulate it, doesn't it? And so, people saw it as the Viagra of the day as such, which is quite funny, really. But
I'll take your word for it. I've never actually rubbed mint on myself, but I dare say that it's true. But
yeah, I mean, if you must have brushed your teeth though with mint toothpaste, and you can feel the mint tingle your gums. It's exactly the same principle,
Tingles your tongue. Who said witches didn't have a sense of humour?
Yeah, well, obviously, if people don't realise it's something that's just growing naturally at the bottom of their garden, it's been disguised, then you can charge money for it. So
that's it.
They would want people to know is it's just mint that it's growing at the bottom of your garden too. Obviously, we know that now, but around those times we wouldn't have known like penicillin. What penicillin can do. Science has discovered that, but it may well be that witches had penicillin is mold, isn't it? It grows on things, so maybe in their time penicillin had been discovered, and it was basically seen as a magic potion that witches were selling, and
it was all right, you don't get many jellyfish around the Pendle area, but if you get stung by a jellyfish, people say you get somebody to pee on you.
Yeah.
I mean, back then, if the very off chance that a jellyfish stung you, wherever, and somebody peed on you, or that's a lot better, then you could turn around and say, well, that person's a witch.
Yes, and that's I mean, the famous in Huntingdonshire, where I live now, the most famous witch story is there's a place here called Warboys, and the Warboys witches. I mean, if you Google Warboys witches, you'll find them. And the reason that they're so famous is because they had a spat with Oliver Cromwell's grandmother, and she basically, after this woman who was accused of being a witch, she called her in, and this is Oliver Cromwell's grandmother, and tugged a piece of hair out of her, which was supposed to weaken a witch or something. And so this woman cursed her, and the old lady died not long afterwards. So in that day, that was enough evidence that, the cause of the grandmother's death was the witch had cursed her. But in all likelihood, if someone came up to you and well, you haven't got a lot of hair on your head, but if someone came up and to your wife,
that's nice to remind me. Just because you still get a full head there, just give it a couple of years, my man, and you might be somewhat the same as myself.
I might. I'm not. Don't doubt that. But what I'm saying is, if someone came up to you and suddenly grabbed hold of your hair and pulled a chunk out, then you might say something to them. And obviously, she did. And then this Cromwell's grandmother passes away in the next week or two. That was enough in those days to believe that the witch had cursed her and was the cause of her death. And that poor woman who did that, they were tried for witchcraft, her husband and her children, and they hanged all four of them on the common in Huntingdon. So they say that these Warboys witches still haunt the village, but it's had so much attention. I paid very little note to it in my book. I concentrated more on this Anizard witch story because that one wasn't so well documented. But when you actually look at all the evidence, and you imagine that people 200, 300, 400 years ago could not read or write. So if you saw, something that magically healed a cut or cured a headache or something like that, you may well perceive that there was magic and that person to be a witch. And it was probably just a sort of naturally occurring, drug, much the same as heroin comes from opium and cannabis, the effect that can have from you. Rather than a synthetic drug, it's a natural occurring, not non-man-made thing. It's just a natural drug. It's a bit
but back then, and there's a way how the things started to change in the early part of the 17th century when people stopped accusing so many people of being witches.
Yes.
Because the monarchy turned and I think it was King Charles at the time. I might be wrong, but I think it was King Charles at the time. He started to think, well, maybe this witchcraft thing isn't what it seems to be, and he insisted on better trials for them, should we say.
Yeah.
I mean, I often wonder, you've heard the tale of Half-Hung Maggie?
No.
Never heard it. I was 1800s, it was a woman, Margaret Duncan, I think her name was, but she had a young child. She had an affair with this well-to-do gentleman, fell pregnant, the baby died, unfortunately, and she hid the body. The child was found and she was arrested and charged with concealment of an infant. So she was found guilty and she was hung.
Yeah.
And she was taken down and her family claimed the body. And they were on their way back to Musselburgh, but they stopped off at a local tavern to, have a drink, whatever, a beer, whatever. And there was one of the relatives noticed that the coffin lid had moved. And so they opened up the coffin and Margaret was still alive.
Yeah.
And they revived her.
Yeah.
And she, because she'd already been hung, the authorities, they couldn't hang her again.
Yeah.
carried out a sentence. So she lived for about another 35 years after that. As I say, because, you know, the authorities found out, but there was nothing they could do because they'd already hung her.
Yeah.
So you wonder if that had happened during the 1600s, what would that person be seen as?
Well, you know, they're cheated death, haven't they? They're you know, magic. They can even overcome death. So how people thought. You know, these people, you got to remember that they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they had no even formal education really. They were just people that worked in fields and, you know, grew crops and things like that. They weren't educated in the fact that they could read or write. So if you did see, you know, something like that, your first thought, it's a bit, in a way, if you think about it, it's not too dissimilar to nowadays. If people were to see a ghost, their main reaction of most people would fear, because they're seeing something that doesn't compute with science. You know, science says this can't happen, possibly happen, and obviously there's lots of stories from all around the planet, very credible people, even, you know, royal families. I mean, Prince Charles, I know, at Sandringham in Norfolk, he's gone on record about a paranormal experience that he had there, that he and his valet, they were together. So it wasn't a case of he made a mistake and thought something, you know, happened when it didn't. His valet, you know, experienced it at the same time. And, you know, somebody like him, would you want to come out and say something like that? You know, you could possibly make yourself the target of ridicule. Oh, he's seen a ghost, or he's had an encounter with a ghost, blah blah blah. But yeah, there's lots of very credible people around the world who've had these paranormal experiences. So,
well, I mean, I've been asked a couple of times, have you ever seen a ghost? And all I can answer to that is not to my knowledge, because, you know, who actually knows what a ghost looks like?
Yeah, I've only had the one experience. I've been doing this for, well, since I was a teenager. I'm 60 now, and I've only ever actually seen one full-bodied apparition. I've witnessed poltergeist activity where things are moving, and I've not been alone. I've had other people with me who've experienced it at the same time. And the first and second time that happens, it is absolutely fascinating, because, you know, when something's moving and there's no logical explanation, oh, you know, it's on a slope, so it's just rolling down the slope, or you know, you see something move, or without anybody touching it, and you go and check for what hidden wires and fishing wires and things like that. You know, my mind is naturally skeptical whenever anything that's paranormal. The first thing I'm doing is analysing all the facts and trying to come up with some logical explanation for what you've just witnessed. I would say, in my experience, 90% of the time you can find one, but that sort of 5-10% of the time, when you can't, is what intrigues you and makes you keep going. I think I keep doing it because I'm hopeful that I will see another apparition, ghost, soul, call it what you will. I've been on investigations with colleagues who have had that experience, but I've only ever personally witnessed it the once. And that happened in broad daylight in the middle of a summer afternoon, probably 2 or 3 in the afternoon, inside a building. But and it was a little bit dark in there, but by no means what we would call dark. It was just dark compared to the outside because it got small windows. But you know, I could quite clearly see this thing, and I was only 15 years old. I knew I wasn't drunk. I knew that you know, I wasn't mentally ill. And when I went out and told my friend, he could see that something had happened, and he asked me, and I told him. I could tell, you know, I could tell by his face that he wasn't shocked, and then he started sharing things that he and his family had experienced. And the house I was in was 16th century, but it had I'd seen a monk, and there was history and records to say that during the sort of 11th, 12th, 13th century, that land was farmed by monks. It was basically owned by the nearby Ramsey Abbey, which is quite a famous abbey in East Anglia at that time, on a sort of scale with like Ely and and those sort of places. So yeah, I can. Although that happened a long time ago, I can still recall that quite vividly, and I know for a fact that I didn't imagine that, and why would I imagine that? I just basically had gone in that room countless other times before and never witnessed anything, but that particular day, I did. And then, when I came out and spoke to my friend about it, he basically, we were I was 15, he was 14. He said to me, don't tell Chris, his sister Christine, she was only 12. We don't want to frighten her. But yes, me and my family have had strange experiences in this place that we can't explain. And this guy, he was best man when I got married. He's such a nice, straight guy. He wouldn't make that up. And when I wrote my book, I wanted to put that story in, and I was able to interview his mother. And she confirmed that yes, they had these things happen, and they didn't really talk about them that much. It was sort of kept within the family. But
aye, so that's the thing that you can't explain. We've had, I mean, to say I've been asked if you've seen a ghost, and I'll say not to my knowledge. I don't think I've ever seen one. Whether I will ever see one, I don't. But I've heard things, I've sensed things. That place, that estate we were doing Caldwell. We got a lot on recordings that we can't explain. One particular is the Whispering Lady that I called her. I can't explain that sentence we got. And there was another occasion there. I mean, the amount of stuff we got there was incredible. Yeah. There was one day it was me and somebody else, and with the K2 meter. The K2 meter was sitting in the ground. The ground was totally flat. Yeah. And it must have been sitting there for about 10, 15 minutes, something like that. No long. And then it get knocked over. And none of us touched it. There wasn't any strong winds or vibrations. There was nothing. But we do have it on camera. The K2 meter just went, down. And as things are, we can't explain it. If there was, we tried to work out why that meter would just fall over, but we couldn't work it out. And so it's things like that you can't explain. I mean, like that Whispering Lady, as I call her, it was right next to me. Now there was 4 or 5 other team members there. They heard breathing and what have you at the same time, but I distinctly heard this woman right next to me. It wasn't through the app.
Yeah.
It was right next to me, and this place is the nearest village was about 5 or 6 miles away. It was in the middle of nowhere. Everybody's phone was in flight mode. All the usual things you look for.
Yeah.
Just couldn't. And I remember you saying on a previous live, Mark, that the rogue sort of taxi signals and stuff.
Yeah.
And you said that if you get activity, intelligent activity for about 30, 40 seconds, you can kind of rule out a rogue signal, whatever.
Yeah, I don't think you can rule it out, but it's a coincidence if you're communicating with something and it's answering or on request and it appears to understand what you're saying and it answers whether through a K2 meter or through an EVP or whatever. If something is responding for that length of time, then basically you've got to get that rogue signal at exactly the right time for over a minute. That's highly unlikely, improbable so I think these devices, ghost hunting devices and things, have got they have a place, but I think that sometimes people will go out and they'll get one thing happen and they can assume that that's paranormal when there possibly is the rogue signal type thing. we're talking about living in a world with 5G where we've got signals bouncing from satellites. So even if you're in the middle of nowhere, technically speaking, the possibility of picking up a road signal is there. So, obviously the more remote you are, probably the less likely it is to happen. But I think you have to be careful. You've got to remember that most of these ghost hunting apps, ghost hunting equipment, REM pods, things like that, they've all got one thing in common. They have electronic receivers in. So they're electronic receivers to pick up electronic signals. And, we all carry a mobile phone nowadays. So, these signals are around us everywhere, much more than they are. Even things, it's quite funny. I got one of these wireless doorbells, and you just press the button. There's no wire, and it wirelessly rings a bell inside. It's the bell is plugged into a wall socket, and the bell on the wall has a battery in it. But basically, when you hit the battery, it sends a wireless signal, hits the bell, and the bell rings. The bell's got power from the plug socket. So the button that you press was staying in. It wasn't sort of, when you press it, wasn't sort of bouncing back out. It was stuck in. When we actually had that button stuck in, neither me or my partner could open our cars with our car keys. It was obviously sending out that signal, and it was blocking the signal that both of us we both drive Vauxhall Astras, and neither of us could open the car door. We could open it putting the key in the lock, but you couldn't open it using just the key alone. And as soon as we unplugged that that doorbell, then suddenly the car doors work again. I mean, I didn't realize, first of all, so we just thinking, God, this is weird again, how you can easily make a wrong assessment. You go, some witch is blocking our car keys. It's strange that both of our car keys don't work. If one of our car keys is broken, that's probably probable, but two of them at the same time, that's highly unlikely. It was that, we debunked it. It was the doorbell was stuck, and therefore it was emitting the signal from the battery and somehow jamming the signal that our car key sends to the car to open the door. As simple as that. So,
I know signals can, and one thing that always crosses my mind is, I'm not a big fan of tech, but recently I've grown quite fond of the K2 meter. And to me, when you're sitting there, if you got a K2 meter sitting there dormant, for instance, say for 15, 20 minutes, and then you ask a specific question, like say, if you are a male, can you make the light go to yellow, for example, and it goes straight away to yellow, or within a few seconds it goes to yellow, and then you say, can you make the light go off? To me, that's hard to debunk if it's been sitting there. So that location we were at, we had 18 minutes of intelligent responses that we can't explain. We went to another location a couple of weeks before Halloween, and the K2 meter was going up to red, and it was staying on red constantly. Now, this was an old castle. It was in the middle of an old country park kind of thing. There was nothing, there was nothing about. So, I mean, it's kind of like things like that I find fascinating. As I say, I'm not a fan of tech, but I have grown fond of the old K2 meter recently. If
I was in that situation that you just explained, this is why you've probably heard me say this before, but when I met the great Peter Underwood, who was probably the most famous person in the paranormal world of the 20th century, he wrote 50, 60 books on the subject. And I met him. I actually said to him, what's the most important piece of kit to take with you on an investigation? Expecting him to tell me, I don't know, some bit of talcum powder to dust and make sure there's no footprints, or, back in the day before we had technical gizmos or whatever, Ouija board or whatever piece of kit. He said, the most important thing to take, Mark, is people you can trust. Because if you've got people in your party who you don't know and you don't trust, and you've said to them, have you got your phone off? Is your phone on flight mode? And even on flight mode, I've got a signal on a K2 meter when my phone's been on flight mode. You can try that yourselves. If you put your phone on flight mode and you hold it next to a K2 meter, you won't get a signal like you would if it's not on flight mode, but it can register on your K2. Try it. You'll see that I'm right. So if you get one signal, I think you can't judge that as being categoric proof. You want something over a period of time that is responding. And very often I've seen sort of Facebook live streams where people are getting stuff over a period of time. But when you actually analyze it, they're probably asked 10 questions. 5 times they've got no response at all. 5 times they have. And they talk about the 5 times they've got a response, but they forget that 5 times they didn't get a response at all. So you've got to, again, forgive me, but I'm very skeptical. If something happens and I think it's possibly paranormal, I'm actively looking for a logical explanation or something that could, possibly account for that.
Got to. I totally agree with you, Matt. You need to look first. If you get, activity on the K2, you get a wee buzz, the lights went off, but then you need to sort of look around you and say, right, well, is there anything here that can make that light go off? Your phone's in flight mode. Is there any power leads getting into this building? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
You do. I think you do. I totally agree with you. You do need to debunk as much as possible. If you strip away as much as you can and then take another look at it.
Well, this is what Underwood taught me. He said to me and my uncle Trevor. I mean, Underwood was president of the Ghost Club for 30 odd years. My uncle was a Ghost Club member for 25 plus years. And they said to me, treat it like a criminal investigation. He said, you go to a criminal investigation, you take all the facts, all the evidence, and then you look for explanations. And if there is a possible explanation, you put that to one side. And then you keep doing that. And then what you're left with at the very end, which can't be explained, is probably the truth.
Mm-hmm.
This is why one of the things that, again, doesn't very often get mentioned on paranormal investigations that I see, but one of the most important roles when you're a paranormal team is to have what I call a scribe, somebody who's writing down the things that you're picking up. For instance, if you are picking up names and you're picking up dates, they are things that can be evidenced with ancestry websites and things. You can go back now, as far as the sort of 16th century, 16th, 17th century. So, if you get a name and you want to investigate it afterwards, you can very often these days, if you've got names and dates, there will be records and things. And, you might get other facts. So it's very important that sort of in the excitement of when people are getting a lot of activity, that someone is actually writing all this down. And then at the end of the investigation, you can say, right, we've picked up a Bob Smith from the information that we gleaned from him. He was around in the 1850s. Any other information you found on him? A name like Bob Smith is probably going to be hard from a point of view, but if you get an obscure name, you can very often evidence it. And, then it does become interesting, because if you've then got information and believe you've connected with something, and you have historical records that prove that person exists, and the dates, the name, and perhaps some of the things he told you can be, historically researched. There is a theory, and I think the Society for Cyclical Research, there was a strange thing where people would go on paranormal investigations and they'd say, right, we don't want to know the history of this place. We know it's got haunted history, but we don't want to know the details, because if it's supposed to be haunted by a monk or a phantom knight, then people will see monks and phantom knights because of the power of suggestion. So we don't want to know. We'll just go and investigate, and then at the end we'll say what we come up with. I think the SPR produced a booklet. They produced a booklet about. I'm trying to think what it's called now. I've probably got it written down somewhere. They sort of put together some of these booklets for guidance notes. I think Stephen Parsons is the guy on the SPR, I think, who's written quite a lot of these booklets. And they're just guidance notes, from people that have been doing paranormal or societies like the Society for Cyclical Research or the Ghost Club, where they've been doing it. The Ghost Club's been in existence since 1862, well, probably a little bit earlier than that. So there's been people in that club, and because that club's been there is a knowledge of experience that gets passed down within the club. So they can probably give you guidance as to the best ways to conduct an investigation. But I think it's important to remember that they are guidance. Nobody knows, this is what you do on a paranormal investigation. You always do this, then you do that. Because of the nature of it, some people find, well, when I did this, I got nothing. But when I started to do that, or, when a woman gave these questions out, we started getting answers, or, a woman's giving the questions and then a man does. So I think it's very important. Again, it's something that I've mentioned before. I sometimes get asked to go and look at buildings where they're having a lot of paranormal activity. And the first thing I say to them is, look, keep a diary of this. I call it a ghost diary. Every time something happens, you put the time down, the date, a brief description of where it happened, exactly where it happened, what happened. And if you keep that diary, after a year or so, you can start sometimes to see patterns appearing to the point where you can actually probably predict, what's going to happen. I'm going to go and investigate Hinchinbrook House. I know from historical research that a lot of the sightings there have happened in December. And so it made sense to me when I got the opportunity to go in there, to go in December. And so, keeping records and having a scribe who keeps notes of what you pick up. Very often on an investigation, so much information can come through via electronic gadgets or dowsing in other ways. And if nobody's writing that down, some of it gets forgotten.
Aye.
Or if you haven't even researched the place, you go in there and something happens that because you haven't researched it, perceived to be insignificant, you don't notice it. But if you know the history and you know what's gone on there before, you would pick it up and say, hey, that's really significant. This has been reported before. But if you go in there completely, knowing nothing about it, you could possibly miss that, or there's other stuff going on that you disregard that as fairly insignificant, when in fact...
So you just want it passed by. But sorry, but I know what you mean about the different kind of techniques and stuff like that, and to me, there is no right or wrong way to investigate. Everybody's different. We're different when we go out investigating.
Yeah.
We try different things. I've known a few teams, no disrespect to them, that they go and it's the same agenda, time after, same routine, same thing, time after time. And to me, it might work for them, but it doesn't work for us. We go out and we like to not have a laugh with it, but we like to be relaxed, have a light kind of atmosphere about us, because we think that spirit's more attracted to you if you've got a kind of light feeling about you. You don't think you're all kind of SAS style sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's also important, Scott, that the people that go paranormal investigating, what are their motives for going? There are some people whose motive is to prove that the paranormal exists and to be scientific and do it. There are other people who go just for the fun of it. You'll know as well as I do that sometimes you go on a paranormal investigation and absolutely nothing happens. So, do you just sit there seriously and be sort of bored stiff? So you have a little bit of banter, and you can sometimes just enjoy being in a really old building just for the sake of the building and its history.
Aye.
They're hoping to witness some paranormal activity, but you don't get any. So I think, if people go along, I'm not a fan of ghost apps personally, but some people are. And if they go along and they get enjoyment out of doing it, then they're not hurting anybody. What's wrong with that? You'll
Mhm.
get other people who will ridicule them and say, "Oh, it's a load of rubbish. We're serious. We go into it with a scientific bent." And I think that you just need to sometimes stand back and say, "Hey, what am I doing this for?" And ultimately, to me, I've been doing this for such a long time now. I've got no sort of yearning to prove to the world that ghosts exist. I just go and do it for my own satisfaction. And when you do actually get some paranormal activity, you feel, it's quite exciting.
Aye. We're the same. Obviously, I mean, we've had a few bits of evidence that we cannot debunk, we can't explain, and
Yeah,
we've had it validated by quite a few different
yeah,
people. But it doesn't stop you getting back out. We go back out because we enjoy doing it. As you say, you can sit there for hours, Mark. We've all done it. You might be freezing cold, and you might come away with not even a light.
yes,
But we do it because we want, we enjoy doing it. And people, again, people, as you say, people might see us as nuts,
yes,
use insane,
yeah,
to all hours of the night and all weathers and sitting in a
yeah,
castle or wherever.
yeah,
But we do it because we enjoy doing it. The history fascinates us. And at the end of the day, we're all looking for that big capture, the big bit of evidence, But if we don't get it,
yeah,
then so what?
yeah.
You know?
It's a bit, you could use in a different analogy. You could say, everybody buys a lot. People buy a lottery ticket for £1, and there is that hope that that the numbers will come up and it will change their lives. And
Mm-hmm.
not that I'm not talking about money of this, but when you go on a paranormal investigation, as you know, most of the time, you don't, Mr. Ghost doesn't just pop out and start having a chat with you. That's just sort of, fabulous, but it doesn't happen. As I said, I've been looking to see ghosts for over 40 years and I've only seen one. And, I have been on a few investigations where people I know and trust have seen an apparition, and I believe that they have. But actually seeing a ghost, I believe, is really rare. I think
Mm-hmm.
you're much more likely to experience what most people would describe as poltergeist activity.
See,
Yeah,
I felt that vacation we no long finished. We were there. I don't know if it was 6 or 8 weeks or something. It was quite a wee while. But the more we went, the more we seemed to get. And I was getting the kind of, now it might just have been me, a couple of team members felt but as if the spirits that were there were getting used to us, were getting
yes,
to know us,
yeah,
because we felt that every time we went, we got that little bit more. And we were starting to, it was starting to form a kind of picture of what actually went on. I'm not saying it's the truth or whatever, but it was like a puzzle. There was bits and pieces of a puzzle starting to come together.
yeah,
And so I was of the thinking, well, I think the more you go to a location, if a spirit's comfortable with you, it's like in real life, the more you go to a pub, for instance, locals get to know you, and the more conversation opens up. I know it's a bit of a comparison, but it's basically the same idea.
yeah.
You know.
I think you might be right. I read an article the other day which was quite interesting, and it basically said that it was religious person had sort of poo-pooed paranormal investigating and ghost hunting and stuff like that. And when you actually sat back and analysed it, certainly Christianity and most other religions say that, when we die, that's not the end of it. We don't pass on. And
Mm-hmm.
really, basically we're doing the same thing. We're going and saying we think that, yes, there is life after death. not as physical bodies like we are, but our spirit, our soul, our life force, whatever you want to call it, lives on. It's not something like an organ like a heart or a lung that needs air, needs food and drink to keep it alive. It's not something that you can see. What was interesting, I remember reading ages ago that somebody had performed a rather strange act where they'd weighed dead bodies, and they'd weighed them before death and after death, and there was a difference in weight. I can't remember, it's something like 200 grams or something like that, but there was definitely a change in weight from the moment the person was alive to them passing. So a lot of people think that their spirit, their life force, leaves their body, and that's accounts for this change in weight. It's certainly an interesting concept.
I've read that. A couple of people, some people have asked me, what's your spirit, what's your soul? My way of looking at it, and see, this is just my way of looking at it, is your soul is what gives you, as you just says, your heart, your lungs, they're all just basically meat.
Yeah.
Basically, your brain, everything. Your soul is basically what gives you your personality, what gives you makes your heart beat, what keeps you breathing when you sleep, what tells you to keep breathing when you're sleeping, what makes you a good or bad person. And I heard a guy told me years ago in a spiritualist church, he says, if you compare your soul to petrol in a car, and I just kind of looked at him, I said, petrol in a car to your soul. He says, think about it. He says, petrol in a car is what keeps it going.
Yeah.
He says, if the petrol leaves the car doesn't go.
Yeah.
He says, your soul is what keeps your body going. Once your soul leaves your body doesn't go.
Yeah.
And the more I thought about it, I thought, you know what? Possibly could have a good point, and that's what I think your soul, your spirit is. It's just your whole personality. It's who we are, and that's what goes.
I had a debate with a clergyman, a vicar, and he was basically laughing at me, and he was saying, "So you believe that when people die, their ghosts are around?" And I said, "Well, that's just as plausible as you read the Bible, and it's telling you that Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 5 fishes. That doesn't compute, does it? But obviously that's written in the Bible, and it's your belief, and that Jesus rose from the dead. And yet you're telling me that when people die, that's the end of it. And you're sort of in my mind, I'm not disputing your faith, but I'm just giving you the respect of that's what you believe. I've been investigating the paranormal for such a long time, and in that time I have seen things that occur that I can't explain, and I'd like to think of myself as being a real skeptic and looking everything for a possible answer and a possible scientific explanation for what I've just experienced. But there have been quite a number of instances over the years where actually I can't explain it, and it doesn't. And also you have to remember that this isn't just happening in England. These reports are coming everywhere, all over the planet. Every civilization, every society has reported this. There is a theory again which I read that basically religion and paranormal investigation are so powerful because since time began, we all as human beings fear death because it's an unknown. So religion gives us some comfort in that death isn't the end and it goes on. Likewise with the paranormal, when people when spiritualism first emerged in America in the 1800s, it was such a big thing because there'd been so many wars and fights, and again in this country, just after the First World War, all those people that perished, there was families that were grieving, they'd lost loved ones, they'd lost miles away from home, in another country, and that they were people that they loved, and they naturally want to believe that they still live on and that they can still communicate with them. So there was a lot of charlatans and people like that in the spiritualist world, but for every 9 charlatans, there's occasions where things, they defy logical explanation.
As you see, Matt, when spiritualism first came out, it was New York, it sort of first popped up, and there's been that much death, wars, whatever. And people were, this is spiritualism, this is a way to talk to your dead relatives. So people's ears did perk up. Well, I wonder if we could, talk to my mum, my son, whatever. And then, as you say, charlatans, there was that many people saw this is a way to make a quick buck.
Oh, yeah.
Let's face it, anybody can put their hand up and say, right, well, I'm a medium.
Yes.
I could go out in the street tomorrow and say, right, well, I'm a medium.
Yeah.
You need to back it up. But there was that many people back then. There's somebody says, I'm a medium, say, oh, well, can you tell me if my son's okay? He died in the war.
Yeah.
And this guy, whoever, sit down with me for $20 and it could give them any old BS and they'd believe it.
I always think, Scott, if you look at somebody like that street magician, Dynamo, and you took him back in time 300 years and he started doing those tricks he does in the street within a metre of somebody right before their eyes, and you saw somebody doing that, we know logically that there is an explanation, even though we can't fathom it out half the time, which is why it's so entertaining. He does something that defies physics and stuff like that. 300-400 years ago, he'd have certainly been hung as a witch or a wizard or whatever, wouldn't he? And
he would end up the end of a rope,
yeah,
definitely. Mediums as well, genuine mediums.
Yeah.
300-400 years ago, they would have been seen as witches or warlocks, whatever it was they were called back then. And they would have been burned at a stake or hung, and it could have been a genuine medium.
Yeah.
But they would be struck up.
People were generally frightened of them because obviously they were seen to be able to do something, getting back to, what I was saying, using a natural plant or herb and, disguising it by these pictures you see of these sort of haggard witches with their cauldrons. They were probably taking, perfectly natural plants that had medicinal properties and basically making them into something that didn't resemble that plant so that they could sell them to people as a magic potion when,
it was big business. Say big business.
Yeah.
And that was one of the main, reasons that people were accused of being witches by the competition.
Yes. Yeah.
Take the Pendle witches again.
Yeah.
Between the two families, there was a lot. They were both in the same kind of business, but there was a lot of rivalry between them. And so it was either business or land kind of thing. As in the case of Roger Knowles with Alice Nutter, that was over. Obviously Alice Nutter originally went to court, which was unheard of in the days, a woman going to court, but she went to court for land rights and against Roger Knowles, and she won.
Yeah.
She won her case, and this infuriated Roger Knowles. So what did he do? He accused her of being a witch, and Alice was hung.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a way to get rid of them. Your competition, a love rival, a business rival.
Yeah.
And as you say, it could have been just women with their pots or cauldrons making up, some kind of potion, whatever.
Yeah.
But it was seen as, the devil's brew sort of thing. They were doing the work of the devil.
We didn't have science then. Scientists who could say, actually, this plant contains this, and this. And, we've been able to prove that it is very good at curing headaches. It does heal skin quickly. You
Mhm.
refer to the poultice, it does draw out a sting or a boil or something like that. But to people that are uneducated, they can't read and they write, you could quite easily convince them that you were a magic man and this was magic. And if they wanted you to help them, then they paid you money, you would help them. And they believe that they've had a magic cure, when in fact there is a perfectly logical explanation why whatever it is they've put on your leg or whatever part of you, does make it better and help it. So I can remember a very funny story in the late, I think it was about the sort of round about 1970. My great grandmother, who's long dead, she was watching. I was at her house and I was watching Star Trek, and they were sort of showing, Scotty and Captain Kirk on their sort of little phones, looking at one another and talking to one another, and that was just before man had landed on the moon. And she was sort of, this is rubbish, you'd never be able to talk to somebody who's miles away. You're up in Scotland, I'm here now, we're talking face to face. And so all that my great grandmother was saying was rubbish, would never happen. Men on the moon, it's 50 years later, it's happening. So
exactly. I mean, the older generation. Listen, as I said earlier on, my grandma, we call her my grandma. It was two things I always remember. It was, sugar and soap on a plaster. That was her poultice for anything. Yeah. And whenever we get teeth out, she used to make us hot milk and put bits of bread on it.
Yeah.
Why? I don't know, because it was absolutely disgusting. But that's what you got when you went home. There you go, son, there's your hot milk and bread.
And that had probably been passed down from her grandmother. Got it from her grandmother. And, that's where, at some stage, back 400 or 500 years ago, that might have been perceived as magic. There's probably an explanation, the yeast in the bread, as a reaction and stuff. And so
the reaction, all right.
Yeah.
But, it didn't help the gap in your gum, but I'll tell you what, I was absolutely disgusted. I wouldn't even think of giving it to anybody. You just had a tooth here, take some hot milk and bread, they throw it back at you. And the sugar and soap, whenever she put the plaster on, always remember it. Yeah. The soap used to dig in to, the cut or the boil, whatever it was that we had, and she'd rub it, get that on, son, you'll be fine. A couple of days and it'll cure it.
Yeah.
And as you say, 300-400 years ago, you might get hung for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. If it worked, and it worked incredibly well, and no one understood why it worked, then, it would be regarded as magic.
Same as chicken soup. I was actually talking to John for GSI earlier on today, and he was saying he's loaded with man flu. So I jokingly says to him, get on the couch with a bowl of chicken soup, because chicken soup seems to cure everything.
Yeah.
Whenever somebody's no well, I'm going to get some chicken soup.
Yeah.
And
I can remember my grandmother, she used to say to me, if ever I had a sore throat, I should have lemon squash, but have hot water in it. And, you see all these cold and flu remedies now, and they've all got lemon in, because there is a proof that the acid in the lemon actually does either numb or soothe inflamed, throats or something like that. So there is science behind it to prove that it works. But at the time, I thought, I should be having medicine. I've got a sore throat, not lemon juice. So
exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. Thanks for coming in, Gemma. She's with Hectic Paranormalcy, and they're in on Sunday. But on that note, Mark, I think we'll wrap it up, because it's 25 past 11.
Okay.
I know we had a wee intermission, but we're glad we got you back. So I'll just hold on to you for a wee second, buddy, after we come off.
Yeah. Hopefully people know the sort of bit of the history behind the famous Raynham Hall photo now, because most people, like I said, they know the photo, but they don't know who she is, and they don't know the history behind it. And there's quite a fascinating story there if you actually dig into it enough. And when I got that revealed to me, because I first heard this ghost picture, I think I saw it in the late 70s for the first time, and then to actually go to the place and get one of the Townshend family, Lady Townsend, share with me that about these medical bills, and it sort of contradicted everything that the story portrayed. It was quite interesting. But what's also interesting is there was certainly some really well documented sightings of this Dorothy Townshend. And so long before this photo was taken in 1936. So I don't know, she says the house is quiet. She's never seen anything. So the jury's out, as they say.
Aye, exactly. As as the brown lady found peace and moved over, passed on, or moved over, make it sound like a bed, don't it?
Yeah.
As she found peace and passed, went to the light, whatever. Who knows? But we'll leave it at that. We will post all. I've got all the photos Bart sent me. I will post them back. I have posted them before, but I will post them back up. But everything, chat. Thanks for joining us. Back again. I apologise for the slight intermission, but we got the man back, so that's all that matters. And enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you on Thursday night at 9 o'clock with GSI. So till then, folk, take care. Bye.
Bye.